The Women's Leadership Institute in the Auburn University College of Liberal Arts is pleased to present Leaders Educating Through Discussion. We hope you will take a moment after you watch our presentation to add your own voice to the dialogue on our website, auburn.edu/women's leadership.
I'm really glad to be here with you today. I think it's the celebration of International Women's Day, and I just want to thank the Women's Leadership Institute and the National Society of Leadership and Success for inviting me here to share with y'all, because I'm really honored to do that. I don't know if you noticed the name of my talk. I entitled it Living from the Inside Out, and I hope by the end of the talk you'll have an idea why. But after the 1984 Olympic Games, I was talking to a reporter, and he asked, how did a small town girl from Alabama with little formal training in sports make it to the Olympic Games in a sport she'd never heard of until she was 22 years old? And I said, well, I prepared for it all my life. You know, from the time I can remember, I love sports, and I particularly love sports that you played with the ball. But I grew up in Alabama in the 50s and 60s, and there were no organized sports for girls, nor were there interscholastic sports in high school, where it seemed that cheerleading, yelling and jumping and tumbling was fine, but running up and down a basketball court, shooting a basketball was too strenuous. Go figure. But anyway, for the first about 6 years of my life, I lived in the country. We lived outside the city limits. So the only people I had to play with were my brother and my sister. And y'all know how that goes, right? And sometimes my cousins on the weekends, you know, we would play together if they'd come over to visit, or we'd meet at my grandparents'. But in the month that I turned 7 years old, my life hit the jackpot. My parents moved. We moved our family out of the country into a new subdivision in town. And it was awesome. It was the first time in my life that I had lots of kids to play with. And the best thing about it was that a ball game could be organized anytime. The playground was our social hub, and with a little imagination, transformed itself into the field or the court we needed to play whatever sport was in season. Have y'all ever seen the movie Field of Dreams? Raise your hand if you have. Okay, good. How many haven't? All right, let me tell you what. Field of Dreams, it's a baseball movie, but it's more than a baseball movie. It's about this farmer who, played by Kevin Costner, in Iowa, and he had all this, you know, his cash crop was corn. And one day he was out working the fields of corn, and he hears this voice, and it says, if you build it, they will come. And he's looking around, and the voice just kept coming to him, and after a while he just couldn't deny it. So the long story is, he plows up his cotton crop and he builds a baseball field. And then one day these ghosts start coming out of the baseball field, and as soon as they step onto the baseball field, there are these baseball players. And they're young and they're vibrant. They're these old baseball players who have passed away that played like in the 1920s, and they've come back to this field so that they can play against each other. And after the first day of practicing and playing, as they were leaving the field, going back into the cornfield, the players or the ghosts, one of them turned to Kevin Costner and said, is this heaven? He said, no, it's Iowa. But you know what? When we moved into that neighborhood, that's what I felt like. Is this heaven? No, it's Rayward subdivision. You know, but for me, the playground in Rayward subdivision was like a little slice of heaven, because it was the place where the athlete in me began to find her way. So I'm a big believer in the truth and power of our dreams. You know, I think that our dreams, what we can emotionally envision for our lives, our dreams are the knowledge and language of our hearts. And it's our heart that knows the truth about what we're capable of doing and who we can become. Well, as a 7-year-old, for me, the best part of that new house was the sweet gum tree in the backyard that was the perfect size for me to climb. I was immediately attracted to that sweet gum tree, and I loved climbing it. I loved the challenge of climbing to the top, and once I got to the top, I loved how everything looked so different, and I loved how I could see so far. And I love too that the solitude and the peacefulness that always greeted me when I got up there. It was just a sanctuary for me. And I would just sit up there and I daydream about a lot of things, I'm sure, but mostly I dreamed about playing sports, which was very interesting because, like I said, there were no organized competitive sports for girls at that time. I loved dreaming about being an athlete, though, y'all. I loved it. It felt so natural. It made me feel so good. It made me feel so free thinking about playing sports. So while the boys who I played ball with every day were honing their skills in organized sports leagues, there I was, left with the playground and my dreams. But every year, though, that tree grew and I grew, and the physical challenge got a lot tougher, but the view got more expansive, and along with it, so did my dreams. And I think that part of that was fueled by the 1964 Summer Olympic Games. I had just turned 12 years old, and those were the first Olympic Games that were ever televised internationally. And so that was the first time that I had ever seen women competing in sports. I had seen still pictures, like in my dad's Sports Illustrated from time to time, they would have pictures of women maybe in track and field or something, but it was the first time I'd ever seen women really competing in action. And I remember seeing the hurdle race for the first time, and I thought that was so cool because I was the type, I loved to run and jump. And so after I saw that race, I remember just running outside and running through the neighborhood yards, jumping over every shrub and tree and bush I could find, pretending I was a hurdler. Fortunately, we had lived in the neighborhood a long time and people knew me, so it wasn't any big deal. But that's just how I was. And then in 1968, when I was a sophomore in high school and there were still no sports for girls in high school, I was glued to every telecast of those Summer Olympic Games from Mexico City. And yes, for no particular rational reason whatsoever, I was dreaming about being an Olympian. I can't explain it. I didn't see myself playing a particular sport or doing any particular event. I could just feel myself and see myself being a part of that and being an Olympian. And it was fun and it felt really good. But so I finished high school and still no sports for girls. However, with one exception, we did have a Powder Puff football game my senior year, and we beat the juniors 16-9. So that was my only competitive sports experience in high school. In 1972, on the coattails of the civil rights movement for racial equality in our country, came the legislation of Title IX calling for gender equality. Now, how many of you know of Title IX? Okay. How many of you don't? It's okay. A lot of people don't and don't know. So, but how many of you know what the legislation really meant? What it covered? Most people think.
It's most often cited in reference to college athletics because it provided that universities that sponsored men's athletic programs were required to sponsor women's athletic programs.
Right. And that's what Title IX is most known for, but it was much, much broader than that. So I want to read to y'all what the Title IX legislation stated, because it's very important in every aspect of women in our society. It says, no person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participating in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. Okay, now this applied to many areas, but chief among them was access to higher education. And that's hard for y'all to believe now, I'm sure, but that was the times. A lot of times women were denied access to some institutions of higher education. To give you some perspective, in 1972, women earned 7% of all law degrees, 9% of all medical degrees, and 13% of all doctoral degrees. Okay? In 2001, women earned 47% of law degrees, 43% of medical degrees, and over 50% of all doctoral degrees, largely due and primarily the result of the opportunities that were provided by Title IX. So other areas included in that legislation were career education, training, opportunities for training, employment, equal access to employment, and equal pay for employment. Sexual harassment was also included in that legislation. But as was said, the area that Title IX has become best known for is its impact on athletics. I arrived here at Auburn on the cusp of Title IX, and I appreciate and admire so much the women who were here at that time in the physical education department who were navigating the currents of that social change, and they were making sure that those of us who wanted to play sports were provided the opportunity. And it was through their patient and persevering leadership that a bridge to the future was built for Auburn women's athletics. A program that today provides education and athletic opportunities for women from all over the country and around the world. And it's now one that has its own identity too. It has its own culture and history and heroes, of which I'm very proud, and I hope that y'all are too, you know, of our women's athletics programs and how they represent us. When I came to school here, I was chomping at the bit to play anything I could play. Okay, so I decided that I think that there were 8 sports, not all of them, a lot of them were intramural. There were just a few of them that were, you know, starting to have competitive opportunities with other schools, and so I decided to try out for volleyball and basketball, and I made both of those teams. And once again, it was like Field of Dreams. It was like, is this heaven? You know, no, it's Auburn. But for the athlete in me, it was a little slice of heaven, because for the first time she was getting the opportunity to play and to compete. I loved every minute of my time here at Auburn, and my playing experience, my sports experience. It was great, and I also appreciated being a part of and benefiting from a lot of the progress that was being made, particularly in the area of women's sports. For example, there used to be a gym on campus, the sports arena, and it was affectionately called the Barn. It no longer exists. It burned to the ground in the late 90s, was it? Yeah. So the Barn was the place where, well, it was. Let me tell you where it was located. It was at the corner of Roosevelt and Duncan. I don't know which way we're standing, but you know, across the street from the football stadium where the parking deck is, that's where it was. And this was, I don't know if it was 97 or 98. Anybody remember the barn burning down? We were playing LSU in football, and somebody had dumped charcoal. Huh?
I think it was 99.
99? Okay. And somebody had dumped charcoal from their tailgate on the grass beside the barn, and it caught fire. That whole barn, I mean, it was a blaze. It was a show, and that game was being televised, and the camera just kept drifting to the blaze that was coming up, you know, behind the stadium. I mean, it was bigger than the entire stadium. I mean, it was higher. You know, you could see it from inside the stadium. But it was because that barn, it was built in 1948, and it was made of all wood. I think with the exception of the ceramic fixtures in the locker rooms and the bathrooms, you know, it was good kindling. It just, you know, it went down pretty fast, but it put on quite a show. But anyway, the barn was where all basketball games were played until the Coliseum was built in 1968, at which time the men started playing their games in Verdi's Coliseum, but women's volleyball and basketball remained in the barn. I love the barn. I love playing in the barn. I have a lot of good memories from there, but it was a big deal, as much as I loved playing there, when in my senior year, women's volleyball and basketball began practicing some and playing most of our home games in the Coliseum. I mean, that was a big step in 1974 because the women's teams were no longer relegated to the barn, so to speak, but we were making some progress toward equality. Also by 1974, Auburn was a member of the AIAW, Association of Intercollegiate Athletics for Women. It was a national governing body that was formed to enhance and support the growth and development of women's college athletics throughout the country, and it also provided regional and national championships for most of the team sports. So that it was good to have that organization around that and Auburn being a part of it. So women's sports at Auburn at that time, just 2 years after Title IX, was moving along rather nicely. Then in August of 1974, I graduated, and thinking my playing days were over, and I got a job teaching school, and of all things, coaching girls high school basketball. Title IX had made an impact that quickly. I graduated from high school in 1970, no sports for girls. 4 years later, I was coaching high school girls basketball. It was awesome. Things just started moving really quickly. But anyway, I was teaching and coaching, and then in October of that year, the most amazing thing happened. I received a phone call from Sandra Newkirk, who was my volleyball coach here at Auburn, and she said, "Rita, we've received a letter from the United States Olympic Committee about tryouts for the new Olympic sport of team handball. Would you be interested in going?" Y'all, my heart about jumped out of my chest. I had no idea what that sport was. All I knew was that my heart was screaming, yes, go. That's all I could hear. I needed to do this. I believe she could have said tiddlywinks, and I would have said yes, because I was so excited about the chance to play again. But there was one problem. I had just started working, and I didn't have any money. I didn't have any money to pay for the plane ticket to the tryouts, so I decided to ask my parents if I could borrow the money to go. So I went to their house, explained the situation, asked if I could borrow the money, and my dad said, "Absolutely not." He said, "That is so foolish." He said, "Rita, you have got a good job. You've got to start thinking about your future. You're going to make some money, and you got to think about your security, and blah, 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 blah." I mean, really, that's what I heard. After absolutely not, it was just blah, 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 blah. It was like, what Emerson said, my heart, what was in my heart was talking so loudly, was speaking so loudly, I couldn't hear what he was saying. That's pretty much like it was. And I said, okay. So I started calling all my friends, seeing if I could scrape up enough money to get a ticket to go to those tryouts. It was going to be at Iowa State University. And one of my friends' moms said, "I'll loan you the money." And so I got the money. I went to the tryout, and I really liked the game I saw. It was nothing like what I expected, but it was tailor-made for the skills that I had developed on the playground over the years. It was perfect. It was running, jumping, throwing, and catching. It was awesome. I fell in love with it. So it was a week-long tryout. I made the first cut, and then an incredible 10-year journey later, I was an Olympian. So as the reporter suggested in his interview, it is an unlikely story until you break it down. From a very early age, my heart held the flame of truth about what I was capable of doing. And through all the years of no opportunities to play sports, my dreams just kept fueling that flame. One that not only sustained me on the playground, but kept me connected to the athlete that was calling to live through me. So when that call came, delivering the gift of team handball, I was totally prepared to say yes. See where I'm coming from? It was here all the time, The dreams were real. So our dreams are the knowledge and language of our hearts. And to me, what's purposed in our hearts will always be superior to our circumstances. Team handball became my ultimate athletic challenge, but more importantly, it created space for the ability God gave me to find its greatest freedom and its highest expression, and that was the young girl's dream come true. I'm just going to leave you with one more story. One of my favorite quotes is from a poem by Walt Whitman, and he writes of life and our privilege to participate in life. He said, "The powerful play moves on, and you can contribute a verse." In 1977, I had an experience that left a lasting impression on me. I visited Mammoth Caves in Kentucky. Anybody ever been to Mammoth Cave? They're pretty awesome, aren't they? They're the largest cave system east of the Mississippi River. And you know, the river is what's caused the caves through the years, and they're very unique because as you go down into the depths of the caves, you'll walk into these caverns that are, some of them, the size of maybe this auditorium. So I took this tour where they said you were going to go down to the very bottom where the riverbed is, okay? And so the guide, it was very few of us, probably about 15 of us, went down there. And, you know, we were meandering down and getting through and squeezing through cracks, and, you know, and finally we got down and we opened up, and the riverbed was down there, and it was a room like this, but probably about half the size. And there were sconces on the wall with lights, so it was, you know, fairly lit up, you know, but it was dingy, but you could see. And he said, "I want you to walk over to the river and look in it." So we walked over to the river and looked in there, and there were fish. But the fish were albino. They were all white, and they didn't have any eyes, and they didn't have any scales. And we were going, "What's the deal?" And he said, "Well, it's so dark down here that over the years, it's just been a mutation. They don't need scales, they don't need color, they don't need eyes because there's no light." And then all of a sudden, he turned out the lights. And y'all, I have never felt darkness like that in my life. It was so thick. It's like I felt like I had to push through it. It was so heavy. And I could feel my eyes like this, I like, you know, trying to see, but it was just totally, incredibly dark. And you could feel people like, you know, breathing heavier and, you know, just like getting a little bit fight or flighty, you know, or whatever, you know. And so he probably was about 30 seconds that he left it off, enough for people to start building up some anxiety. And then he struck a match. That one little match lifted all that darkness. You could see. And everybody goes, "Oh," like that. And then he asked anybody who had a match or a lighter, and you have to understand that this is 1977, everybody smoked and there were no restrictions on where you could smoke, so lots of people had matches and a lighter. And then one by one, people started lighting their match or lighting their lighter. And as they lit the light, the darkness just kept lifting, and it kept getting brighter. And you know, that really, two ideas struck me at the time. One, I thought, there really is no darkness. There's only an absence of light. You know what I'm saying? It was so dark. He struck that one match. The darkness lifted. There really is no darkness. There's only an absence of light. And then I thought, I wonder what the world would be like if everybody let their light shine. The powerful play moves on, and you can contribute a verse. What's purposed in your heart? What makes it dance and sing and jump and run and feel good and free? What is the light that's really calling to live through you? You know, that light that's looking for a way to shine. That's the verse you're to contribute. That's the verse each of us, that's the contribution each of us is to make. And as each of us let our light shine, just like in Mammoth Cave, the darkness is lifted. And we do our part to help build a world that hopefully works for everyone. Thanks.